Original versus Reboot, the show where we take reboots and remakes and compare them to their original film. The film up today is Candyman. Seeing as it's Halloween and a reboot of Candyman came out just this year, I felt it was fitting to do an original versus reboot where we compared the 1992 version and the new 2021 version. Now I've watched the original and the reboot back to back. And one thing I know people are going to say straight off the bat, similar to when I did original versus reboot for The Thing, is this is not a reboot. I know. This is not a hard reboot. It is a reboot, it's just not a hard reboot. By which I mean, they aren't completely forgetting about the original movie and just pretending it never happened and doing their own original story. Don't forget, the original 1992 movie spawned multiple sequels beyond that first film. So this film can't just be considered the second one. Try not to say his name too much. But they do take the story from the original and incorporate it into the reboot, which I think is a good way to go with it, rather than just trying to rehash the story or remake or retell the exact same story. Put your own spin in it and pay homage to the original is always a good way to go with a reboot. And the original was made in the 90s. So when it comes down to visuals, the reboot had a clear advantage. We made 30 years later and having the advantage of all the technology that's come out, the cameras, the editing software, and the visual effects that are now available to filmmakers. But there's something about the original. It just has a creepiness to it. It has an eeriness to it, which the reboot simply doesn't have. As I mentioned, when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, I knew the story and the urban legend around this movie, and it terrified me. I don't think any kids hearing the story of the reboot will give a shit. So while the reboot has better visuals, it looks better, it's got some better lighting and better special effects, the original has a better creepy, eerie vibe to it that all Halloween scary movies need.
I'm sorry, I have to go.
No need to leave yet.
But I'm late.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim.
As I've already mentioned, one thing the reboot did very well is pay homage to the original film. In the reboot, our protagonist is a struggling artist who is told the story basically of the original movie.
This is a story about a woman named Helen Lyle. She was a grad student, a white grad student, doing her thesis on the urban legends of Cabrini Green. For research, she came down to Cabrini a few times, asking questions, taking pictures of graffiti, people. And then, one day, she just snaps.
In the original, you're very much led down a path by the filmmakers that Helen Lyle might actually just be crazy. She might be visualizing it all. It's not until near the end where they expose that she's not just crazy and he is real. But in the reboot, there's a lot more people, independent of the protagonist, in various scenes, who say his name into a mirror 5 times and suffer the consequences when a protagonist is not seen by the audience. But instead of leading your audience down a path of thinking the protagonist is crazy and possibly imagining all this, they kind of lead you down the path of thinking this guy's the killer and he's just blaming it on the legend. What I will say is, for this soft reboot, because it is a soft reboot, it's not quite a complete thrown away of the original story. For this soft reboot, they do pay good homage to the very original film, and they also tie it up really well. Because if you've seen both, I imagine you've seen both if you're watching this video this far in, you'll know that there was a baby in the original movie. The protagonist within the second movie, or the reboot movie I should say, is that baby grown up, which is a nice little tie-in, works really well. One thing that I think the original actually had over the reboot is the creepy soundtrack, because throughout there's a score in the original that just adds to the eerie vibe. Now they do have the similar song in the reboot, but they don't use it as much. They use it much more sparingly. But creepy music and the use of sound and music I think was slightly better in the original and just added to the creepy vibe of the movie and really intensified some moments within the movie, which they don't quite do as well in the reboot. When it comes to this type of movie, and you're trying to make a scary movie that'll have people jumping out of their seats, I think the original had far more creepiness to it. One thing I was surprised when I finally watched the original movie for the first time in my life is that it wasn't as gory as I expected it to be. A lot of the deaths happen off screen, something they maintain in the reboot, but you do see the aftermath of the killings. Interestingly, in the original, Candyman tells you at the beginning that he kills his victims from groin to gullet, which even the thought of that is it's just terrifying. Ouch. That's my first thought right there. Ouch. Whereas in the reboot, he more just slices people and dices people whatever way he wants. Both films have a similar runtime, around an hour and a half. I think the original was around an hour and 40. They both run at the same time. However, I did feel that the reboot had slightly better pacing and went by a little bit quicker, and we got to the point a little bit quicker. Although what I will say is, even after watching the original one, I still kind of had like an eerie feeling. You know, you get chills sometimes after some of these movies. I had that after the original. I didn't have it after the reboot. I kept thinking about the original after I watched it and some things that happened and some things that were said in it. After watching the reboot, which was only a couple hours ago, I'm not really thinking about anything about the movie. I'm just moving on to the next thing. I'm focusing on making a video. There's just something about the original that the reboot doesn't quite have, and I can't quite place my finger on it other than saying it's just better told. So when it finally comes down to it, the original has better audio, better vibe, and possibly a better told story, whereas the reboot has better special effects, better visuals, better pacing. It is a tough one as to which one is better. They were both quite enjoyable, I'm not going to lie. I like both movies. I'm not a guy who watches a lot of horror movies, but I did enjoy both movies. They were both very well done. However, for me, the original was just slightly better than the reboot this time around. But this is where I throw it over to you guys, because I would love to know your opinions on which is better, the 1992 version or the 2021 version of Candyman. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And you might have noticed I've gone out of my way in this video not to say his name too many times, because there's a mirror right behind the camera and, you know, just be on the safe side. Don't want that happening, especially the groin to gullet one. At some point we're going to have to get a scoreboard for original versus reboot as to which is winning, originals or reboots. We'll tally it up one day, but today the original takes it. And with all that being said and done, thank you so much for watching.